Next meeting to talk about is the one that we're all too familiar with, board meetings, right? Whether they're quarterly, like they should be, whether they're every other month, which if you need it maybe, and God forbid you do it monthly, then there's something wrong, but we'll talk about that later. But this is the meeting that we're all the most familiar with, right? So I kind of want to just touch on what they're really for, how they operate, the notices of them, and then later on we're going to talk more specifically about just some ways that you can make them more effective and more successful for you. But let's talk about why we have them. I mean, we have them because you're a nonprofit corporation, so the officers of that nonprofit corporation, you as a board, are supposed to get together and discuss business and make decisions, right? That's the purpose of your board meeting. That's why you have to have them. So MCIOA, Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act, requires that you meet. The Nonprofit Corporate Act requires that the board gets together to meet, and your own bylaws require that the board gets together to meet. Most of them don't say the frequency requirement. Sometimes bylaws might say at least on a quarterly basis the board should get together in a calendar year, but usually there's not a requirement on the frequency. So that's why you have to have them, right? Because that's where you're supposed to be making decisions and discuss business. State statute says and your governing documents say you have to do that. But the primary purpose of a board meeting that I want to just stress to you, the purpose of a board meeting is to get together to make decisions. I'm going to repeat that. The purpose is to get together to make decisions. I bolded it and I underlined it, I highlighted it, put a different colored font. That's why you get together as a board, to make decisions, and that's what you're doing at those meetings. And just in case that didn't get through and you need a visual aid, here's the sign. That's why you get together as a board, to make decisions. So let's just do a knowledge check. Who thinks that the purpose of a board meeting is to comply with all community complaints? No. Feels like that though, right? Doesn't it sometimes feel like you're getting together as a board because you have to talk about the 15 different complaints that came in? But that's not the purpose of the meeting. Who thinks it's to help President Paula plan her next party light party? No. Sorry, I'm a sucker for alliterations. What can I say? But sometimes it feels like that, right? It's, as a board, you get together, it becomes a social hour. I get it, but it's not. It's a business meeting of a nonprofit corporation, right? Sometimes does it feel like it's a forum for Treasurer Todd to hear himself talk? We've all got one of those treasurers, right, that wants to just go over all the numbers that no one else cares about, but thankfully Todd does, right? No, that's not the purpose. If you need to flesh out financial issues and questions, do that with the manager. Don't do it at a board meeting unless it does pertain to the whole board and you got to understand something. Finally, is a board meeting's purpose to sample Secretary Shirley's new sugar cookies? No, but that'd be nice though, right? It'd be nice to have a little treat. I put that one in there. So obviously the purpose of a board meeting is none of these things, but I put those 4 up there because I think those are like the 4 most common faux pas of a board meeting, right? And I get it, because as a board, your friends, your neighbors, you want to get together and you want to socialize and you want to sample those cookies. I get it, but it's a business meeting, guys. So here's why it's a business meeting, because if you're under MCIOA, you are required to have an open meeting. What does that mean? Well, statute says that when you get together as a board for a board meeting, you are supposed to allow your members to be there to observe it, not participate in it, not vote along with you, but to observe it. So if you have an informal meeting of the board where you're all sitting on someone's couch, which, sometimes that works, that's fine, but you're meeting at someone's house and you're having Shirley's cookies and talking about Paula's party light stuff, right? The people, your homeowners, technically can be there, and I don't think they want to hear that kind of stuff. So because you're required to have open meetings and your members should be there, you should just have the perspective of a board meeting is truly a business meeting, and we should just get down to the business of the association. Next thing I want to talk about when it comes to a board meeting is the notice of a board meeting, and this gets kind of tricky because state statute, Iowa, says that you do need to give a reasonable notice to the members of that meeting because it's an open meeting, so they should know that they should be able to come. But it's not very specific on what that notice requirement is. It's not like the annual meeting or a special meeting where you have to give it within a time frame and here's what it includes, right? It just kind of says you need to give notice of a meeting. And some things that, so here's just a little bit of a tip and a trick. We'll talk more later, but the notice can simply mean at the end of your current board meeting, you announce that, oh, we're gonna get together, June 5th is the next board meeting. Just by announcing that and then including it in the minutes, you gave your notice. You required the notice, you fulfilled the notice requirement of the state of Minnesota. But be careful that your governing documents, I would say maybe 10 or 20% of the time, governing documents might actually stipulate that you do have to give notice to the members in a specific way. Sometimes it might say that they have to have at least a 7-day notice of the meeting. So whatever your procedures are, every association is a little different. Some, like condo buildings, maybe they put it on a bulletin board of, next week is the board meeting and here's the agenda. Some associations make the practice of just doing an email blast saying, hey, board meeting is next week at this date, time, and place. Some associations, many associations, don't do anything because most documents don't require you to. So just be careful of if you have notice requirements in your bylaws, because the state statute notice requirements are pretty vague. And the other thing I will say about your bylaws is there's actually 2 different places about board meeting notices that get a little confusing. Sometimes when you look at the section of the bylaws that talks about board meetings, there's usually a section that says notice. And it usually says something that the president shall give notice of the board meeting. But that actually is, he or she is supposed to give notice to the board of the meeting. That doesn't infer to the membership of the meeting. So some people, I've experienced it a number of times where homeowners are unhappy, like, you're not giving the notice requirements it says in the bylaws. It says right here, the president should give notice 7 days. Like, no, the president gives notice to the board. That's what that says. So you got to just be careful about that, what your bylaws specifically say, but also be aware that that's what the state statute says when it comes to notice. I'm just going to touch on an agenda sample before we dive into ways to make meetings more successful. The agenda should look fairly common. It has these components. Typically, you're going to call the meeting to order. You're going to verify that you've got quorum of the board. You're going to approve the minutes from the previous board meeting. Usually, you're going to give a couple different reports. Usually, the treasurer gives a quick report. And usually, that report just includes, how are we performing with our cash assets? What's in our checking account? What's in our reserves? And then how are we performing with our operating? Here's the amount of dues and income we've taken in year to date, and here's the expenses that went out. So here's how we're performing. That, I would advise, is usually what the treasurer's report should consist of, those basic numbers. And then usually there's some sort of a management report, right? Here's where your management company, where we earn our money. Here's the things that we accomplished since the last time that we met. Sometimes you might have committee reports, depending on your association. Not a lot of associations have committees. Just a side note, I would recommend that your committee report doesn't happen orally at your board meeting, where you have the committee members come and give some grandiose report. Have them submit a report. Maybe it's the minutes from the committee meeting. Don't go over them just because you don't want the meeting to become a 3-hour cumbersome meeting. If you have any old business, so this is anything that might have been tabled from your last meeting, anything that carried over that was on the agenda that you didn't get accomplished or that you officially tabled. And then new business. right? This is the primary purpose of your board meeting, right? To make decisions. So that would be your new business, a listing of the things that we as a board need to vote on. And then you adjourn, right? Now the last thing that you see on the slide here is open forum. There's a great video that we have in our resource library about the open forum component to a board meeting. Because remember, a board meeting is a board meeting, but the members are entitled to come and observe because it's an open meeting. You don't have to have a section of your meeting where you allow the homeowners to talk. You don't have to have that. You can just say, hey, you're here to observe, that's it. But a lot of associations have taken, this practice of let's carve out 15 minutes to allow homeowners to interact with the board and ask questions. Do that before the meeting starts, or do it at the end after the meeting adjourns. And there's pros and cons to both, and like I said, go check out that video because we talked to a really experienced manager that's experienced both, and there's some great advice in that video about how to kind of manage that open forum. But that's what your agenda should look like for a board meeting. Those are the primary components. And let's talk a little bit more in a bit about how you can make those board meetings more effective.